My ex-girlfriend threw our silver promise ring onto a greasy restaurant table, loudly announcing she was leaving me for a real provider. What she didn't know was that her arrogant new boyfriend was just a mid-level manager at my company, and I was the chairman. The mid-range restaurant reeked of charred meat and stale grease. Linda crossed her arms, the cheap fabric of her knockoff designer jacket rustling. Disgust dripped from her face. 3 entire years of her youth wasted, she claimed, waiting for my bank account to finally match her delusions. Sitting beside her was Ye Chin. He wore a crisp, tailored suit, flashing a luxury watch that cost more than the annual rent of this entire building. He was a senior manager at Taipan Corporation, the heaviest financial empire in the city. Ye Chin adjusted his silk tie with a condescending smile. He leaned back and smoothly told me not to blame her. A woman like Linda required elite status and absolute security, he insisted, pointing out my inability to afford even a basic Michelin star dinner. I sat perfectly still. My expression remained locked. I had buried my true identity for 3 years to test if Linda valued my character over my wallet. The exact answer sat right across from me, reeking of cheap perfume and borrowed corporate arrogance. Quote underscore zero underscore, I stated. My voice hit the air like cracked ice, dropping the temperature at our table instantly. Linda frowned. She wanted a dramatic scene, craving public tears to fuel her own ego. Instead, Ye Chen chuckled darkly. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his thick designer wallet and tossed it onto the table. It landed inches from the rejected silver ring and my half-empty black coffee. He told me to take a taxi home in the rain. It was his parting charity gift to a total loser, gloating about representing the new power of Taipan Corporation. He warned me not to spend his cash on instant noodles. I calmly buttoned my pitch-black winter coat and stood up, ignoring the crumpled money. Quote one underscore, I replied. I didn't raise my voice, but the crushing indifference wiped the smugness off her face. She expected me to grovel. Instead, I looked at her like a toxic asset I had just permanently liquidated. I turned my back and walked toward the exit, leaving the cash and the ring untouched. Linda laughed loudly, leaning onto Ye Chen's shoulder to play to the surrounding diners, calling me a stubborn, broke simp. I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the freezing evening rain. Zero regret existed in my mind. Hard, cold facts and a deeply refreshing control replaced any lingering tension. The restaurant door squeaked open behind me. Soft, hurried footsteps slapped against the wet pavement. A polite voice asked me to wait. I turned to see a young waitress in a worn uniform. Her plastic name tag simply read, Sophie. Sophie held out a steaming paper cup of black coffee. Her eyes held zero calculation, only quiet empathy. She offered the drink on the house, noting the freezing rain. Quote 2, she explained softly. Quote 3. She wished me a safe trip home, bowed her head respectfully, and vanished back into the loud steakhouse. The sudden warmth of the cup seeped into my icy palms. I memorized the name on her plastic tag. The exact second the restaurant door clicked shut, a heavily tinted black Maybach pulled up to the curb. The chauffeur stepped into the driving rain, opening the heavy rear door with a precise 90-degree bow. I slid into the luxurious leather interior. The stark transition from the cheap steakhouse felt absurd. My executive assistant sat rigid in the front passenger seat. He immediately turned around holding a secure, glowing tablet. Quote, he asked with total reverence. The cheap coffee tasted surprisingly sharp. Quote 5, quote I ordered. Quote 6, quote. The assistant nodded sharply, typing the new directive into his highly encrypted device without a single question. Our Maybach glided silently through the rain-slicked streets like a dark ghost. My assistant held up the screen again. Linda was already weaponizing her new relationship status across social media. A highly edited selfie from the restaurant dominated the feed. She clung to Ye Chen, dripping with fake prestige. Her caption bragged about dropping dead weight for Taipan's new power. Strangers flooded the comments in a digital feeding frenzy, actively mocking her unnamed, broke ex-boyfriend. My dark eyes reflected the cold blue light of the screen. A surgical satisfaction bloomed heavily in my chest. She desperately craved public status. She wanted to stand beside a supposed corporate king in front of the whole world. They willingly chose the public arena for their little show, I said, handing the expensive tablet back to the front seat. I looked out the bulletproof window at the towering skyscrapers. Over half the buildings in this financial district belonged entirely to me. Activate the public audit protocol on manager Ye Chin, I commanded. Let him overplay his hand, then we amputate it. The assistant's fingers flew across the secure keyboard. The security net went live immediately. The countdown to absolute ruin began. The very next morning, Taipan Corporation headquarters buzzed with the frantic energy of high-level finance. Ye Chen strutted through the open plan office like a conquering emperor, oblivious to the invisible corporate crosshairs painted directly on his back. He marched straight to the finance counter and slammed his palm onto the polished white marble desk. He demanded the Level 1 corporate gold card immediately, his voice booming intentionally to attract maximum office attention. The young finance clerk hesitated. That specific card remained strictly reserved for executive-level client entertainment. Ye Chen leaned his entire body weight over the counter, aggressively questioning the clerk's authority to deny a senior project leader. He claimed he had a highly sensitive VIP client meeting today. The loud bullying bravado shattered the clerk's fragile resistance. Reluctantly, the intimidated clerk slid the heavy gold corporate card across the desk. Ye Chen snatched it with greedy fingers. The cold metal felt like unlimited power. His phone vibrated sharply in his pocket. Linda practically shrieked with manic excitement through the receiver. She was waiting at the VIP Diamond Auto showroom, surrounded by reporters covering a luxury car event. Ye Chen smirked viciously. He traced the embossed numbers on the stolen card and instructed her to point all cameras at the entrance. He wanted the entire city to witness his financial dominance, totally blind to the security cameras tracking him from above. High above the city, inside the soundproof penthouse office of the Taipan Tower, I stood calmly by the massive glass window. On the monitors directly behind me, a blinking red GPS dot moved rapidly across the digital city grid map. The head of corporate security spoke through the secure intercom. He confirmed manager Ye Chen was actively on the move, verifying the target had illegally acquired the Level 1 card and invited journalists for a public purchase. I didn't bother turning around. The chilled glass of sparkling water met my lips for a slow, measured sip. The invisible trap was perfectly set. Ye Chen's massive ego did all the heavy lifting. The arrogant fool was actively building his very own public guillotine. The system was already configured to block all payment limits on that specific corporate card. Any attempted transaction would instantly trigger a critical corporate theft alarm across the entire network. Dispatch the internal Taipan security strike team directly to the showroom, I ordered. Detain him under corporate protocol in front of the flashing cameras. Legal will receive the file after the violation is fully documented. The security chief confirmed the strike team was exactly 3 minutes out. The red dot on the monitor arrived at the showroom. Down on the street level, camera flashes erupted like violent lightning. Ye Chen stepped out of a premium cab with disgusting confidence. Linda sprinted up to him in a flashy designer dress, her eyes wide with toxic greed. She whispered frantically about the newest sports car models inside. Ye Chen patted his chest pocket, feeling the solid Taipan card. He loudly promised the reporters a headline they would never forget, pulling Linda aggressively into the brightly lit showroom. Up in the silent penthouse, I finally turned away from the glass. My expression remained terrifyingly blank. I sat down at my massive mahogany desk and opened a new thick file folder. The massive corporate chessboard was fully active. The first arrogant pawn had willingly stepped onto the fatal square. Inside the crowded auto showroom, a nervous sales manager asked Ye Chen for his preferred payment method. Dozens of heavy camera lenses locked directly onto his smug face. Ye Chen proudly pulled out the gleaming, stolen Taipan corporate card. He slapped the gold medal onto the glass counter with a loud clack, aggressively demanding the entire vehicle cost go on the card. The manager picked it up with shaking hands and slowly inserted the stolen corporate card directly into the blinking electronic payment terminal.
This is the absolute definition of playing yourself. Linda threw away a literal billionaire for the cheap illusion of wealth, and Ye Chen was actually stupid enough to think he could steal from the top of the food chain just to impress a gold digger. They begged for a public stage, and Chairman Liu is about to deliver a performance that sends their social status straight to the shadow realm. The stolen card is in the machine, the media's cameras are rolling, and the corporate guillotine is just seconds away from dropping. When that terminal declines, the face slap is going to be deafening.
The electronic payment terminal emitted a harsh, high-pitched screech. That single synthetic beep shattered the quiet of the VIP auto showroom. The sales manager lost all color in his face. He stared at the blinking red screen. The the reflection of the error code flashing across his wide eyes. Ye Chen leaned across the glass counter, his palm already extended, waiting for the keys to the $3 million vehicle. Linda draped her body over the cold metal hood of the sports car. She adjusted her posture for the dozen flashing cameras, securing her perfect angle. This was her public status upgrade. She needed her followers to witness her locking down a senior executive from Taipan Corporation. 30 hired journalists crowded the gleaming tile floor. Ye Chen had paid them heavily to document his financial dominance in real time. The sales manager swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he pushed the solid gold corporate card back across the polished glass. He stammered an apology, refusing to meet Ye Chen's gaze. The transaction had been severely declined, triggering a critical system error. Ye Chen let out a condescending laugh. He gestured to the surrounding reporters, mocking the utter incompetence of the showroom staff. He barked at the manager, demanding he look closely at the embossed logo. It was a level 1 Taipan gold card, a symbol of endless corporate limits. His index finger tapped the metal numbers. He ordered the trembling man to run the machine again and stop wasting his time. A heavy bead of sweat rolled down the manager's forehead. He weakly pointed a shaking finger at the glaring red text on the terminal screen. The manager whispered that it was not a limit issue. The exact error code read a completely different phrase: suspected corporate theft. The showroom instantly fell dead silent. The clicking of 30 camera shutters suddenly amplified, echoing like a swarm of hungry locusts. A hot flush of humiliation crawled up Ye Chen's neck. His arrogant facade cracked under the pressure as he snatched the heavy metal card back. He slammed his fist onto the glass, screaming that the cheap machine was broken. He reminded everyone in the room of his senior manager status. Linda noticed the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. She abandoned her pose, her designer heels clicking sharply across the marble floor. She looped her arm through his, whining about the delay. Her followers were waiting to see the transaction receipt for her $3 million gift. Ye Chen gritted his teeth, desperately trying to maintain his alpha image. He blamed the manager for failing to understand premium corporate accounts. The heavy glass doors of the showroom burst open. 10 men in pitch-black suits marched into the room. Their matching silver lapel pins caught the bright glare of the overhead lights. This was the internal security strike team of Taipan Corporation. They moved with synchronized heavy steps directly toward the sales counter. The hired reporters immediately scrambled out of their way. Heavy boots echoed across the tile floor, surrounding the couple in a tight circle. Ye Chen recognized the dark uniforms instantly. A sickening jolt of raw panic dropped into his stomach, erasing his arrogant smile. The head of corporate security stepped forward, entirely ignoring the flashing cameras. He locked his cold gaze directly onto his target. The security chief called out Ye Chen's name with booming authority. He announced that corporate security had permanently blocked his network access. Ye Chen opened his mouth to shout a counter-order. The words died in his throat as the chief refused to give him a single second to recover. The chief declared him officially detained by Taipan Corporation. The public charge was attempted embezzlement of 7-figure corporate funds. Journalists immediately shoved their way forward, sensing blood in the water. Camera shutters fired like machine guns, illuminating Ye Chen's pale, sweating face in sharp, unforgiving strobe light. Linda recoiled in shock. She ripped her arm away from Ye Chen as if his tailored suit had just burst into flames. He shrieked that this was a misunderstanding. The cornered man demanded his phone back, desperately insisting he needed to call the chairman. 2 security officers stepped up and grabbed his shoulders. They slammed him face first onto the cold metal hood of the exact car he tried to buy. The heavy gold card slipped from his trembling fingers. It clattered uselessly onto the polished floor, stripped of its corporate power. The chief coldly stated that the chairman personally authorized his immediate capture. He scooped the gold card off the floor into a plastic evidence bag. Ye Chen thrashed wildly against the hood of the sports car. His expensive suit wrinkled and tore as the guards expertly pinned his arms behind his back. A reporter from the back shouted the obvious headline: "The VIP was buying a car for his mistress with stolen money." The press abandoned all polite distance. Microphones were shoved directly into Ye Chen's distorted face. The once arrogant manager looked like a cornered rat trapped in a spotlight. Linda desperately backed away, shielding her face with her designer handbag. She had invited the press to broadcast her social triumph, not her total ruin. She expected to bathe in public envy. Instead, her shiny new ATM was being publicly crushed against a windshield. The low rumble of Taipan compliance vehicles rolled up outside the glass doors. Corporate auditors were arriving to seal the case file before legal action began. High above the chaotic streets, the Taipan executive penthouse remained wrapped in absolute silence. I sat perfectly still in my leather office chair. My assistant stood by the mahogany desk. He quietly tapped his tablet, routing the live showroom news broadcast directly to my wall monitor. The screen flickered to life. A breathless news anchor stood outside the auto dealership, gripping a microphone while showroom lights glared across her face. She excitedly reported an internal scandal at Taipan Corporation. A senior manager had just been publicly apprehended by elite security forces. The broadcast footage cut to Ye Chin being forcefully escorted into a Taipan compliance vehicle. His hair was a sweaty mess. His pride was vaporized. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen was merciless. It boldly read, "Taipan manager detained over corporate card abuse at luxury showroom." Reaching across the desk, I picked up my chilled glass of sparkling water. Taking a slow, measured sip, the cold liquid washed away the day's fatigue. Yechen actually believed he could wield my own company's power to fund my ex-girlfriend. He failed to realize he was merely a clown dancing on my stage. I stated that the first phase of the audit protocol was highly successful. My voice remained perfectly flat, devoid of unnecessary emotion. My assistant nodded respectfully. He confirmed corporate security had taken the man into internal compliance custody, shattering his reputation without giving him the dignity of a private failure. Arrogance is a highly predictable disease. I placed the crystal glass down on a coaster, noting how these parasites always overplay their hand when given rope. Linda desperately wanted the entire world to see her new wealthy status. I simply accommodated her wish, giving her exactly the spotlight she begged for. I ordered my assistant not to let the pressure drop. Manager Ye Chin was just the opening act. It was time to systematically evaluate Linda's foundation. The assistant swiped his tablet screen. A heavily encrypted financial file appeared on the large monitor. It displayed the complete portfolio of the Lee clan. I commanded him to prepare a full audit on Linda's family assets. He needed to check every single grant and loan they received from our subsidiary funds. This trap was shifting from a personal embarrassment to a total structural collapse. The next phase would surgically dismantle everything her family relied on. Bowing slightly, the assistant left the quiet office to execute the orders. I turned my leather chair back to face the sprawling, neon-lit metropolis. Fluorescent lights inside Taipan's downtown compliance holding office flickered with a sickly buzz. The stale air smelled of cheap coffee and deep regret. Linda sat rigidly on a hard plastic bench. Her expensive makeup was heavily smudged from crying, leaving dark streaks running down her pale cheeks. She violently chewed on her manicured fingernails. Her phone buzzed with endless notifications, but they were no longer comments of envy and admiration. Her social media feed was drowning in brutal mockery. The internet was mercilessly roasting the material girl, whose rich boyfriend turned out to be a broke fraud. A heavy steel door buzzed open. An officer led Ye Chin into the visitation booth. He slumped into the metal chair behind the thick glass, grabbing the receiver. Linda grabbed her side of the plastic phone. Her hands shook with pure, unfiltered rage. The loving facade of a devoted girlfriend instantly evaporated. She screamed into the phone, accusing him of humiliating her. Her voice echoed loudly in the depressing room as she called her life a complete joke. Ye Chin flinched at the sharp volume. His eyes were wide with terror. The former executive looked pathetic in his wrinkled suit. He begged Linda for immediate help, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. Every corporate account tied to his name was frozen by the audit. Pressing his sweaty palm against the thick glass, he pleaded. He demanded she call her father immediately to hire top corporate lawyers and force Taipan to release him from compliance hold. Linda stared at him with freezing disgust. She realized in a horrifying flash that she had thrown away absolute stability for a cheap, cornered liar. She had thrown my silver promise ring in my face for this specific man. Now, this very same man was begging her family for cash from behind dirty prison glass. She hissed that her father was furious. Ye Chin had just dragged her prestigious family name into a highly public corporate theft scandal. Slamming her hand against the glass partition, she laid out the brutal truth. She needed a powerful VIP provider, not a pathetic manager begging for rescue from compliance auditors. Ye Chin's face twisted into an ugly mask of panic. He lashed back, claiming he only took the card to buy her that car. He insisted she owed him protection. Linda did not even bother replying to the broke loser. She slammed the heavy plastic receiver back onto the hook, instantly cutting off his whining. Turning her back on the booth, she practically sprinted toward the compliance office exit. She needed to save her own social status before it crashed into the dirt. Standing outside in the cold night air, she pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. She dialed her wealthy father's private emergency number. She started crying the exact second he answered. She begged him to do something, anything, to prove their elite family was not associated with a corporate thief. The sprawling Lee family mansion smelled of old money desperation. Linda's father paced furiously across the expensive Persian rug in his home study. Sitting on the velvet sofa, Linda dabbed her eyes with a silk tissue. She played the naive, innocent victim to absolute perfection. She sobbed pitifully, claiming the bastard Ye Chen completely tricked her. She swore she had no idea he was stealing from Taipan to fund her luxury lifestyle. Her father finally stopped pacing. He rubbed his temples, his mind racing to find a fast public relations solution to this embarrassing disaster. He growled that he had already paid for an emergency legal release. It was not to save Ye Chen, but to stop Taipan compliance from digging deeper into their financial ties. Linda looked up, her eyes widening with desperate hope. Her father always knew exactly how to manipulate the public narrative using his deep pockets. He proudly declared they could not look weak in front of the city's elite. They would host the most extravagant charity gala of the year. Pouring himself a glass of aged scotch, he laid out the strategy. They would show the world their family was wealthy enough to treat Taipan's money like pocket change. Linda finally smiled. The heavy weight of public humiliation began to lift from her shoulders. Her father's vast financial resources were her ultimate shield. Her father boasted about inviting the mayor, top investors, and the entire press. They would wash away this media scandal with a massive show of charity. What the arrogant man completely failed to realize was a simple fact. His family wealth was built entirely on a foundation of highly unstable corporate sand. Across the city, sitting in the silent Taipan penthouse, I read the latest intelligence report. The Lee clan had just booked the city's most expensive hotel venue. They were planning to use their corporate grants to fund a vanity project. They were literally throwing a party using my own money to save their public face. My assistant placed a single crisp document onto my mahogany desk. The bold title at the top read, Revocation of charitable grant funds and credit lines. This legal trap was brutally simple. Every single grant the Lee family received from our subsidiary funds contained a strict corporate morality clause. Ye Chen's highly public corporate detainment did the heavy lifting. Their direct association with a compliance investigation formally triggered the immediate breach of that exact contract. Reaching forward, I picked up my silver fountain pen. The solid metal felt perfectly balanced in my hand. I uncapped it with a satisfying, sharp click. Linda genuinely believed she had escaped the consequences of her greed. Her family was eagerly rushing onto the brightest public stage to flex their fake power. They were blindly walking directly into the financial minefield I had carefully laid out. I looked down at the blank signature line on the thick document. Pressing the silver nib to the thick paper, I signed my name with smooth, lethal precision. I firmly stamped the official corporate seal at the very bottom. Heavy red ink from the seal stained the paper. The financial death warrant for the entire Lee family empire was officially signed and fully activated. Turning back to the window, I watched the dark city lights reflect off the glass. The second trap was perfectly primed, and the bait was simply irresistible.
Did you see that immediate shift in power? The moment Ye Chen's corporate ATM ran dry, Linda's devotion vanished into thin air. That is the core of White Lotus manipulation. Loyalty only exists while the money flows. Now her arrogant father thinks he can use Chairman Lu's own subsidiary grants to throw a PR gala and save face. He has no idea he just stepped on a financial landmine. Will the Lee family's elite status survive the ultimate bankruptcy face slap? Or is Chairman Lu about to completely obliterate their bloodline? Stick around for the next chapter to watch the empire burn.
Camera flashes detonated like flashbangs inside the hotel banquet hall. Trapped against the VIP barricade by 50 aggressive journalists, Linda locked her jaw. She stretched a fake socialite smile across her face while cold sweat threatened to ruin her expensive foundation. Nobody in the press pool cared about her $80,000 silk gown or the exclusive champagne circulating the room. A reporter shoved a heavy microphone directly against her chin, demanding to know why her supposedly untouchable corporate boyfriend had needed an emergency legal release from Taipan's compliance hold. Her manicured acrylic nails dug painfully into her palms. Forcing out a shrill laugh, Linda loudly insisted the detainment was merely a minor paperwork error. Leaning into the cameras, she bragged about the Lee clan's bottomless bank accounts, promising that her father's upcoming mega donation would permanently silence the jealous rumors. Another microphone instantly blocked her path. The reporter pressed harder. "Did Ye Chen actually swipe a stolen Taipan corporate card to buy you a new Porsche?" That question hit her like a physical blow. Her confident socialite mask cracked as a violent twitch jerked the corner of her left eye under the blinding camera lights. Her brain completely blue-screened. Blood drained rapidly from her cheeks as she shrieked for the security team to confiscate the recording equipment. Screaming at the press to back off, she grabbed the hem of her gown and sprinted toward the VIP corridors. Shoulder-checking a waiter, she sent crystal champagne flutes crashing onto the marble floor. The media pack simply trampled the broken glass, chasing their bleeding prey. The live feed of her public humiliation played silently on my encrypted tablet. Leaning back in my leather chair inside the Taipan executive penthouse, I watched her run. Panic had finally replaced her usual green tea arrogance. She had tried to leverage my former status to become a city VIP, but the flashing cameras were already shredding her dignity. Swapping absolute loyalty for a cheap corporate climber came with a steep price. The exact same public she desperately wanted to impress was now ripping her reputation down to the studs. My chief financial officer stood at attention across the mahogany desk. He placed a thick, red-stamped leather folder containing the Lee family's complete financial ledger in front of me. This arrogant clan paraded around the city claiming billionaire status. However, the reality of their accounting books painted a picture of fragile margins and massive, unpayable debt. Their core logistics business survived entirely on corporate charity grants, every single one originating from a ghost fund legally bound to my signature. The CFO flipped straight to a highlighted tab on page 40. His silver pen tapped forcefully against Section 4.12 of the primary liquidity contract. A strict corporate morality clause sat buried in the microscopic fine print. Direct association with active corporate compliance investigations triggered an automatic breach of agreement. Ye Chen getting dragged out of the auto showroom by Taipan security provided the perfect legal trigger. By protecting him and funding his emergency legal release, the Lee family had officially voided their financial armor. Quote 13, quote the CFO reported. Quote 14, quote, tapping my own pen against the tablet screen, I reviewed the final numbers. The steel noose of compound interest was now tightly secured around their throats. They treated my capital like a VIP ATM to fund their luxury lifestyle. Tonight, that exact ATM was going to swallow their entire bloodline. I issued the final command to my executive team. The Lee family wanted to host a massive PR gala to show off their fake invincibility to the media. Staring at the ballroom security feed, I ordered the total asset freeze. The banking lockdown would hit precisely during the father's opening stage speech. Gathering the ledgers, the CFO bowed sharply and exited the silent office. The Lee family had spent $2 million polishing the stage of their own public execution. They demanded the spotlight to prove their high-class status. I fully intended to let those blinding lights expose their empty bank accounts. Inside the Grand Hotel ballroom, the heavy scent of imported orchids mixed with spilled champagne. 200 of the city's business elite buzzed beneath massive crystal chandeliers. Waiters in sharp white tuxedos navigated the marble floor with silver trays of black caviar, while fake corporate smiles and predatory handshakes dominated every conversation. Linda's father commanded the exact center of the room, slapping the city mayor on the back. His booming voice echoed over the classical string quartet, projecting an aura of pure financial invincibility. Swirling a glass of $1,000 scotch, he aggressively dismissed the recent showroom detainment, loudly branding the embezzlement accusations as petty jealousy from desperate competitors. The mayor merely nodded along, keeping a tight grip on his wine glass. Politicians only attended these toxic events to extract massive donations from bloated egos. Standing near a towering ice sculpture, Linda kept scratching at her heavy diamond necklace. Her thumb swiped frantically across her phone screen, refreshing the trending search results. Paranoid intensity locked up her muscles. Across the room, 3 wealthy investors leaned together behind their champagne flutes, staring directly at her while whispering. Cold sweat dripped down her spine beneath the silk fabric. She urgently needed her father to throw $50 million at the city to bury her viral hotel lobby meltdown. Catching the mocking stare of a rival heiress, Linda immediately forced her chin up. Showing weakness in front of the exact people she used to bully was a social death sentence. Ye Chen lurked in the absolute darkest corner of the ballroom. Wearing a hastily dry-cleaned suit, he kept his eyes glued to the baseboards to dodge the vicious stares. Being out under emergency legal release meant nothing when the entire financial district treated him like a leper. He clung to the Lee family's status like a desperate rat on a sinking ship. Raising his hand, he tried to flag down a passing waiter for a whiskey. The server smoothly pivoted, actively ignoring the disgraced manager to serve a real VIP nearby. Ye Chen ground his teeth until his jaw popped. 48 hours ago, he commanded a corner office at Taipan. Now, minimum wage catering staff treated him like invisible trash. Murderous resentment flashed in his eyes as he glared at Linda's back. He silently blamed her extravagant demands for triggering his downfall. Their grand romance was fracturing rapidly under the weight of poverty. This entire banquet was a massive theatrical performance. The Lee clan genuinely thought throwing cash at the elite would magically erase their criminal stench. Corporate crosshairs were already permanently locked onto their primary routing numbers. Their arrogant illusion of control was peaking right before the slaughter. A heavy brass gong echoed sharply across the ballroom floor. The hired string quartet instantly dragged their bows off the cellos, plunging the room into total silence. 200 billionaires and politicians turned their expensive shoes toward the central stage. The blinding spotlights snapped on, illuminating the wooden podium. Linda's father stomped up the velvet steps with maximum authority. Gripping the polished microphone stand, he plastered a sickeningly triumphant smile across his sweaty face. His booming voice thanked the greedy crowd for attending the historic evening. Puffing out his chest, he soaked in the attention from the flashing media cameras. Pointing at the crowd, he loudly declared that jealous competitors had recently tried to smear their unbreakable legacy. The microphone feedback whined under his aggressive tone. Leaving a dramatic pause, he allowed the tension to build. He wanted every single guest to remember the embezzlement rumors so he could publicly crush the scandal with his wallet. Quote 15 ___, he sneered, gripping the edges of the podium. Quote 16 ___. Linda clapped furiously from the front row. Her manicured hands stung as she silently begged the surrounding elite to let her keep her VIP access card. Public validation was her only oxygen. Standing under the blinding golden spotlight next to her father's wealth was supposed to wash away the stench of Ye Chen's failure. Her father raised his fist to deliver his final checkmate. He proudly announced an immediate $50 million liquidity transfer to the mayor's public charity fund. Greedy applause erupted across the ballroom. The mayor stepped forward with a warm, calculating smile. To the untrained eye, the Lee family's $50 million armor seemed utterly impenetrable. Right on cue, a massive 50-foot LED screen hummed to life behind the podium. The system was programmed to display a giant golden charity check to the flashing press pool. Down in the freezing street, winter wind whipped against my black Maybach. The heavy engine idled silently inside the hotel's restricted loading zone. Shadows completely swallowed the plush leather back seat. Up front, my assistant stared intensely at a glowing laptop tracking the ballroom's internal server nodes. "They took the bait, Chairman," my assistant confirmed softly. "The $50 million pledge is officially on the public record, witnessed by the city's highest officials." Checking the glowing face of my Patek Philippe, I locked in the exact second. The arrogant monkeys had climbed to the absolute highest branch of their fragile tree. The higher they climbed, the harder the concrete was going to feel. The Lee family had proudly gathered the entire city to witness their own execution. Cold blue light from the tablet reflected in my eyes. "Execute the override." My assistant didn't hesitate. His index finger slammed aggressively onto the enter key, instantly injecting our code into the ballroom network. Back upstairs, the 50-foot digital screen behind Linda's father violently glitched. The giant golden check warped into a jagged block of gray static. Dead pixels plunged the entire stage into 2 agonizing seconds of pitch black. The victorious smile on the father's face immediately began to melt in the sudden dark. 200 elite guests stopped clapping simultaneously. Linda frantically waved at the audio-visual booth, demanding the technicians fix the broken presentation. A blinding red warning siren flared across the 50-foot display. The official logo of the city's emergency financial news broadcast illuminated the panicked room.
The audacity of this family is actually mind-blowing. Linda thinks she can dodge the press by hiding behind her daddy's wallet, completely unaware that Chairman Liu owns the actual bank. They are literally throwing a massive party using revocable corporate funds, basically building their own financial coffin on live television. The father's arrogant speech is the ultimate setup, and Chairman Liu just hijacked the main screen to deliver the execution. When that emergency broadcast plays, their elite status is going straight into the incinerator. Will they survive the ultimate public bankruptcy, or is this the absolute end of the Li bloodline?
The 50-foot digital screen bathed the silent ballroom in a harsh, flashing crimson light. 200 elite guests stared upward in paralyzed shock. Instead of a giant golden charity check, an emergency financial news logo pulsed aggressively on the massive display. Linda's father froze at the polished wooden podium. The arrogant smile on the old man's sweaty face melted away. He tapped the microphone frantically, his brain blue-screening as he tried to wave off a technical glitch. The booming voice of the lead financial anchor echoed through the high-end audio system. Every syllable dropped like a 100-pound concrete block onto the Lee family. The anchor announced breaking news from the financial district. His towering face declared the total, immediate collapse of the Lee family business empire. Linda instantly stopped breathing. Her manicured hands clamped around the velvet rope of the VIP barricade, her acrylic nails digging into the expensive fabric. She whipped her head around the brightly lit room, desperately scanning the crowd for cameras. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. The broadcast continued tearing through the luxurious atmosphere of the gala. The anchor confirmed their primary corporate investor had officially revoked all charitable grants. Citing a severe breach of strict morality clauses, multiple banking institutions immediately froze the Lee family's corporate and personal accounts. The core logistics company was completely insolvent. Their immediate callable debt sat at over $100 million, payable directly to Taipan subsidiaries. The heavy microphone slipped from the father's trembling fingers. It slammed into the wooden podium, triggering a deafening, high-pitched screech of audio feedback. Linda finally snapped out of her trance. The illusion of her elite billionaire status was burning down to ash in front of the entire city's upper crust. She shrieked at the audio-visual booth to cut the power. She demanded they shut off the screen, screaming that her father was a billionaire and the broadcast was a lie. Nobody moved a muscle. The hired technicians backed away from the control boards, raising their hands. Nobody wanted to assist a publicly exposed corporate fraud. A synchronized wave of digital chimes shattered the thick silence in the ballroom. 200 high-end smartphones began buzzing in the pockets of the elite guests. Wealthy investors and politicians yanked out their devices in an uncoordinated panic. Their private brokers and financial advisors were blowing up their lines. The orders barking through those speakers were utterly ruthless. Every single financial connection to the Lee clan had to be severed before the toxic debt spread to them. The social atmosphere in the ballroom vaporized. The elite guests stepped backward in unison, treating the Lee family like a highly contagious financial virus. The city mayor wiped his hands with a linen napkin, his face twisting in disgust. He had just spent 10 minutes posing for photos with a massive corporate fraud. He violently turned his back on the stage and marched toward the grand exit doors. His heavy security detail instantly formed a protective physical wall around him. Linda's father scrambled down the velvet steps, nearly tripping over his leather shoes. He chased after the politician, his voice cracking as he begged for a moment. The ruined man practically threw himself at the mayor's tailored sleeve. He pleaded for the politician to wait, swearing that Taipan made a massive corporate error. The mayor violently yanked his arm away. He stared at the sweating father with freezing contempt, his dark eyes holding zero pity for the crying fool. His deep voice carried easily over the quiet room as he ordered the bankrupt liar to never touch him again. He accused the father of trying to steal his public credibility. The politician's harsh words echoed brutally across the marble floor. He stated that the Lee family using his public charity fund to launder their toxic reputation sickened him. Pointing a threatening finger at the broken father, the mayor promised criminal harassment charges if anyone from the Lee clan ever contacted his office again. The mayor stormed out of the ballroom, his private security shoving the remaining reporters aside. That highly public rejection stamped the ultimate social death sentence. Seeing the city's top official flee, the rest of the billionaire guests instantly followed suit. Blind panic rippled through the crowd of high society parasites. They abandoned their $1,000 champagne glasses on the nearest tables. Nobody wanted to get caught in the blast radius when the corporate creditors finally arrived. Half-empty crystal flutes clattered against silver trays. The once crowded room emptied in 40 seconds, leaving behind a graveyard of wasted luxury and spilled wine. Brokers screamed through the phones, demanding their elite clients liquidate Lee assets instantly. The financial bloodbath crashed down in real time before their eyes. Linda spun around frantically, searching the dispersing crowd for her supposed savior. She needed Ye Chen to leverage his Taipan VIP status to fix this $100 million nightmare. She furiously pushed past a fallen wooden chair. She spotted his expensive dark suit slipping behind a towering ice sculpture near the restricted kitchen access doors. Ye Chen was practically crawling along the baseboards, desperately trying to escape unnoticed. The arrogant corporate king looked exactly like a cornered rat. Linda gathered the heavy silk of her designer gown and sprinted across the empty floor. Her expensive heels clicked frantically against the puddles of spilled champagne. She intercepted Ye Chen right at the golden elevator banks in the private hallway. He was furiously hammering the lobby button, sweating straight through his tailored collar. She grabbed his lapels with trembling hands and shrieked, demanding to know where he was going. She reminded him the news just announced their $100 million debt. Ye Chen looked at her with pure, unfiltered revulsion. The charming VIP ATM she had proudly shown off on social media was gone. Replaced by a sweating coward, he violently shoved her backward. Linda stumbled on her heels, her back slamming painfully against the cold marble wall of the quiet hotel corridor. Frantically adjusting his wrinkled jacket, Ye Chen called her insane. He whipped his head around wildly to ensure no journalists were recording this pathetic exchange. He spat that her toxic family just defaulted on a massive corporate loan. His eyes went wide with raw panic as he accused her of dragging him into an audit target. Linda stared at him, her chest heaving. She threw his senior manager status back in his face, crying about his promises of absolute security and company control. A bitter, ugly laugh escaped Ye Chen's pale lips. He stepped away from her as if her $80,000 dress was suddenly dripping with highly toxic waste. Sneering ruthlessly, he reminded her that he was a Taipan executive while she was now a penniless beggar. He refused to let her financially radioactive father sink his career. Pointing a shaking finger an inch from her face, he officially severed their ties. He ordered her to never contact him again so he could save his own reputation. Adjusting his gold cufflinks, Ye Chen spat that she was just a shiny accessory, an accessory that suddenly cost way too much money and social capital to maintain. The heavy golden doors of the elevator finally slid open. Ye Chen stepped inside, not giving her a single backward glance as he slammed the ground floor button. Linda lunged forward, stretching her hand out in a desperate final plea. The cold metal doors slammed shut right in her face, severing her connection to elite society. Staring at her distorted reflection in the brass surface, her brain completely short-circuited. The ultimate green tea karma just brutally cashed out her entire existence. She threw my silver ring into the dirt for this exact man. She traded genuine loyalty for a corporate coward who abandoned her the second her bank account hit zero. Slowly walking back into the massive ballroom, she found her father collapsed on his knees. He wept silently amidst the abandoned caviar and melting ice sculptures. High above the chaotic fallout, the Taipan executive penthouse remained wrapped in absolute tranquility. I stood by the massive glass window, watching the city below. Neon lights from the financial district reflected off the bulletproof glass. The entire metropolis operated under my hidden commands, unaware of the puppet master. My executive assistant stepped quietly into the office, holding a fresh intelligence report. He confirmed the Lee family's public bankruptcy was officially complete. Tapping his secure tablet, he pulled up a live financial tracker. He showed our subsidiary corporate creditors actively seizing their remaining logistics assets. Picking up my silver fountain pen, I felt the cold, balanced weight of the metal. I asked my assistant for an update on our former senior manager's movements. The assistant replied smoothly, confirming Ye Chen permanently abandoned Linda. He was currently booking a primetime interview with a top business journal for tomorrow morning. A leaked PR email popped onto the large wall monitor. Ye Chen planned to distance himself from the embezzlement charges by launching a massive media lie. The assistant explained the manager's intent to claim sole credit as the genius behind our upcoming Neo project. He foolishly believed public pressure would force the board to keep him employed. Turning away from the glass, I sat at the heavy mahogany desk and looked across the quiet room. Sophie, the former waitress and new corporate intern, stood by the door. She wore a simple, professional corporate suit, her posture held perfectly straight, projecting that same sharp intelligence I noticed back at the steakhouse. I rewarded loyalty exactly as fiercely as I punished betrayal. Sophie proved her worth when I was just a stranger in a cheap coat. Now she was getting the keys to an empire. My voice cut through the silent office. I asked Sophie if she spent the last 48 hours analyzing the entire data structure of the billion-dollar Neo project. Stepping forward confidently, she clutched a thick folder of technical documents. She confirmed finding several critical algorithmic flaws in Manager Ye's original projections. She placed the corrected files gently on my desk. She had completely restructured the core code, making the project fully viable and ready for immediate corporate deployment. The NEO project represented a billion-dollar strategic initiative. Ye Chen desperately wanted to use it as a powerful human shield against the unforgiving board of directors. Leaning back in my leather chair, I steepled my fingers. I told her Ye Chen thought he could steal her hard work to save his dying career using media pressure. Sophie didn't flinch. Her expression remained analytical as she coldly stated that Ye Chen relied entirely on stolen prestige. His actual technical knowledge was garbage. A surgical smirk touched my lips. She was mastering the corporate battlefield incredibly fast. I asked if she felt ready to become the official executive face of the NEO project. Gripping her hands together, a fierce light burned in her dark eyes. She bowed respectfully, promising she would not disappoint me. She was ready. Nodding to my assistant, I ordered him to let the rat climb onto his new public stage tomorrow. We would drop the official corporate press release right during his live broadcast. The very next morning, the sprawling Lee family mansion resembled a chaotic war zone. A dozen court-appointed bailiffs marched through the expensive halls with clipboards. They slapped bright red seizure stickers onto absolutely everything. Antique vases, imported Persian rugs, and massive flat-screen televisions earned tags for public auction. The grand illusion of boundless wealth violently stripped away piece by piece. The ruthless machinery of corporate debt collection did not care about socialite tears. Bailiffs completely ignored her crying. A large man ripped a diamond necklace straight from her velvet jewelry box, carelessly tossing it into a plastic evidence bin. Linda sat on the cold hardwood floor of her stripped bedroom. She wore cheap gray sweatpants, her designer clothes already confiscated by the aggressive creditors. Everything she sacrificed my loyalty to obtain vanished in under 24 hours. The luxury cars, the VIP access, the social media clout, all entirely reduced to dust. Her hands trembled violently as she held a small, cracked picture frame. It contained an old photograph of us from 2 years ago, taken at a $3 street food stall. In the photo, I smiled warmly at her. It represented a simple life built on actual trust, long before she allowed toxic corporate greed to rot her empty brain. Tracing my smiling face with her shaking thumb, she finally broke. The stark contrast between my quiet loyalty and Ye Chen's vicious betrayal sliced through her chest. Heavy tears streamed down her makeup-free cheeks, splashing onto the dusty floor. The crushing weight of absolute regret finally crashed into her fragile reality. Whispering to the empty room, she realized I would never have left her like this. I always protected her from everything, and she had thrown it all away for nothing. Chasing a fake illusion of elite status directly led to her family's total financial annihilation. Her shiny corporate knight kicked her to the curb instantly. The agonizing pain of her massive miscalculation burned fiercely in her throat. She traded a literal billionaire for a pathetic fraud who left her to rot in bankruptcy. Desperation severely clouded her judgment. Frantically grabbing her phone, she scrolled to my old contact number. She needed me to rescue her from this $100 million nightmare. She prepared to cry, beg, and play the innocent White Lotus victim to win me back. She would promise absolutely anything to return to the safety of my protection. Pressing the call button with a shaking thumb, she held the phone to her ear. She held her breath, desperately waiting for the familiar sound of my voice. The line didn't even ring once. A cold, automated carrier voice immediately answered, stating that the dialed number had permanently blocked her contact. The call disconnected with a sharp, final click. Linda stared at the dead screen, letting out a gut-wrenching sob. She was permanently locked out of my life, forever. Meanwhile, across town, Ye Chen aggressively adjusted his silk tie. He sat confidently in a brightly lit television studio, facing three top business journalists. Flashing a practiced, arrogant smile at the rolling media cameras, he checked his posture. He remained absolutely convinced his PR lie would secure his Taipan power. Viewers.
This is exactly why you never build your entire personality around a fake bank account. Linda wanted to play the elite socialite, but the moment the money vanished, her supposed corporate king threw her directly under the bus. That cold realization hitting her in the empty mansion is absolute cinema. But Yechin is still out here playing dangerous games. He actually thinks he can go on live television and steal Sophie's hard work to save his own skin? He has absolutely no idea that Chairman Liu is already holding the firing trigger on a massive PR guillotine. When that official corporate press release drops mid-interview, Yechin's career is going straight to the shadow realm. Stick around for the next chapter, because the face slapping is about to get brutal.
Ye Chen aggressively adjusted his silk tie under the blinding television studio lights. Studio lamps baked the sweat into his forehead, but he forced his facial muscles into a stiff mask of confidence, flashing a practiced corporate smile at the three business journalists sitting directly across the glass table. He fully believed he could talk his way out of a multi-million-dollar corporate theft scandal on live television. While he performed his desperate PR stunt for the cameras, I sat in the penthouse drafting his termination order. The lead anchor leaned forward, pressing him hard about his highly publicized corporate detainment at the auto showroom. The journalists demanded to know why a senior Taipan manager misused company funds to buy a luxury sports car. Beads of sweat ran down Ye Chen's neck, but he maintained his slick, corporate exterior without a single twitch. He didn't blink, smoothly throwing Linda and her entire bankrupt family directly under the wheels of the media bus. He played the absolute victim. He spun a wild story about emotional extortion, claiming greedy socialites lied to him about their billionaire wealth and manipulated him into swiping the black corporate card. The sheer audacity of his public lie hung in the studio air. Erasing his own desperate greed from the official narrative, he painted himself as an innocent executive who was simply too dedicated to his corporate work to notice the fraud. But his real play went much deeper. Looking directly into the main broadcast camera to secure his corporate survival, he aggressively pivoted the interview away from compliance accusations. He steered the anchors toward a highly classified initiative, declaring his sole focus was the upcoming billion-dollar NEO project. He publicly branded it as his personal creation, promising to lead Taipan Corporation into a brand new era of technological market dominance and massive shareholder wealth. He claimed he spent 3 years developing the core algorithms entirely by himself in total secret. He boldly stated NEO would revolutionize global logistics, which was a remarkable claim considering he had never studied logistics a single day in his life. The journalists eagerly took notes, broadcasting the desperate delusions of a cornered corporate thief to millions. Ye Chen basked in the studio lights, his ego inflating rapidly as he painted himself as the savior of the Taipan Empire. He publicly dared the Taipan Board of Directors to fire the supposed genius behind their upcoming financial gold mine. Across town, Sophie sat in my soundproof office, watching his ridiculous performance on an encrypted digital tablet. Her face remained stoic as the arrogant manager stole her intellectual property without a single ounce of shame. Outside the television studio, the freezing winter wind whipped through the downtown streets of the financial district. Ye Chen confidently stepped through the glass exit doors, expecting a swarm of paparazzi cameras and curious investors. He assumed his television performance had instantly repaired his public reputation and restored his elite VIP status. Instead, a pathetic figure lunged at him from the shadows. Linda grabbed his heavy winter coat with violently shaking hands. She looked entirely unrecognizable. The designer silk gowns, diamond jewelry, and heavy makeup were completely gone. Wearing a cheap sweater and dirty sneakers, she was deliberately playing the part of the ultimate helpless victim. She dropped to her knees on the icy pavement, ensuring the lingering reporters had a perfect view of her suffering. Tears streamed down her pale face as she sobbed loudly, begging him to explain his brutal public betrayal on television. She cried about being a naive, innocent girl who only ever wanted financial stability and pure love. Wailing for the cameras, she accused Ye Chen of brainwashing her and blamed him for making her abandon my quiet loyalty. She screamed about regretting throwing my silver promise ring onto that restaurant table, claiming he forced her hand. Her fingers clawed at his suit jacket as she desperately tried to squeeze a drop of public sympathy from the ruthless manager. She tried to weaponize guilt, expecting her shattered victim act to force him to rescue her collapsing social status. She assumed his male ego wouldn't let him abandon a crying woman in front of flashing media cameras and staring journalists. Ye Chen stared down at her with unfiltered disgust. She was a toxic bankruptcy liability to his newly repaired career. He saw zero value in her tears, especially knowing my auditors had completely drained, frozen, and seized the Lee family bank accounts. He violently shoved her away. Linda hit the freezing concrete, scraping her bare hands on the rough ice in front of the crowd. He told her to get her dirty hands off his tailored suit, loudly calling her a bankrupt gold digger who ruined his life. Without a single ounce of hesitation, he climbed into a waiting corporate town car and slammed the heavy armored door shut. The luxury vehicle sped off into the winter night, leaving a thick trail of exhaust fumes in the freezing city air. Linda sat sobbing alone in the freezing gutter. The mocking journalists didn't offer help. They just surrounded her shaking frame with blinding camera flashes. Her pathetic manipulation act had failed spectacularly. She traded a silent VIP for a greedy rat, and the rat had just bitten her hand. High above the chaotic streets, the Taipan executive penthouse remained wrapped in pristine silence, away from the public drama. Sophie stood in front of my massive mahogany desk, placing the encrypted tablet down on the polished wood surface. She calmly reported Manager Ye's televised actions, confirming he had just publicly claimed full ownership of her entire project network. I leaned back in my heavy leather executive chair. A cold, highly surgical smirk touched my lips. Giving an arrogant man a public microphone is always the fastest way to hang him by his own inflated ego. The higher he climbed his imaginary corporate ladder, the louder his neck would snap when we kicked the rungs out. He desperately tried to build a public shield using media lies. I fully intended to shatter that shield with maximum legal force. Opening my top desk drawer, I pulled out a thick corporate document printed on premium Taipan executive letterhead. I ordered Sophie to draft a comprehensive press release naming her as the sole undisputed creator of the Neo Code. I told her to prepare for a massive promotion. She would become the executive director of the most powerful initiative in the city. Her dark eyes burned with fierce determination. She bowed respectfully, promising to execute the corporate order without hesitation. I picked up the heavy brass corporate seal and pressed it down hard onto Ye Chen's official employee profile document. The bright red ink branded the word terminated directly across his photo. His corporate grave was officially and legally dug. Tossing the ruined file into my outbox felt satisfying. The corporate guillotine was fully loaded and waiting for the perfect public timing. Later that afternoon, Ye Chen marched into the Taipan corporate headquarters like a victorious king returning from war. He strutted through the open plan office, expecting his television interview to grant him total immunity from any internal audit. Junior employees stared at him from their cubicles, and he completely mistook their shocked silence for awe and deep respect. He believed his public lie trapped the board of directors into keeping him employed, despite the criminal corporate detainment. Total invincibility clouded his judgment. He assumed no one would dare fire the visionary behind Project Neo's billion-dollar valuation. Walking right up to the intern station, he stopped directly in front of Sophie's polished white desk with a mocking grin. He looked down at her with sickening superiority, completely unaware he was staring directly at his brand new executive boss. Aggressively snapping his fingers, he ordered the quiet intern to organize all of his technical files and presentation folders, demanding a premium black coffee so he could prepare to present his stolen project to the executive board. He treated her like an invisible servant, thinking her only purpose was to carry his stolen brilliance to the finish line. Sophie didn't flinch. She didn't argue or shout. She simply looked up from her monitor with perfectly calm eyes and offered a polite nod. She smoothly replied that she would handle the project files exactly as his current status deserved. Her icy lack of emotion flew right over his dense head. Ye Chen let out a loud, condescending, and deeply arrogant scoff. As he walked away, Sophie's fingers danced across her keyboard, smoothly dragging his access codes into the digital trash bin. She felt zero pity for the arrogant fool. She refused to let a corporate parasite steal her absolute life's work. He swaggered confidently into his glass corner office. shutting the heavy glass door behind himself to secure his privacy. Settling into his expensive leather chair, he eagerly anticipated a massive corporate promotion and a seven-figure financial bonus. He kicked his expensive shoes up onto his polished desk, feeling like the absolute master of his corporate and financial universe. 3 floors up, I stood inside the highly secure walls of the Taipan Public Relations Control Division. The chief of communications sat at the master control terminal, his fingers hovering over the glowing mechanical keyboard. He looked up at me, confirming the official corporate press release was fully loaded and ready to fire at my direct command. The document was a tactical nuke. It explicitly called Senior Manager Ye Chen a lying, incompetent corporate fraud and a thief. It formally announced his immediate termination and legally credited the billion-dollar NEO project entirely to our analyst, Sophie. The release publicly stated the company was deeply ashamed of his television lies and that Taipan was pursuing maximum legal damages against him. I stared at the blinking cursor on the massive screen. The trap had perfectly closed around his massive, inflated ego. He thought he manipulated the media to save his job. I was about to show him what real corporate media control actually looked like. I ordered the release sent to every major financial outlet and business journal in the country. My eyes remained locked on the digital screen as I demanded it be blasted across every single screen in this city instantly. My voice held zero trace of mercy or hesitation. The PR manager slammed his finger down onto the heavy enter key. A bright green progress bar shot across the main control monitor, filling from 0 to 100% in less than 3 seconds. The lethal corporate payload was fully deployed. Hundreds of thousands of emails hit the inboxes of investors, journalists, and competing executives simultaneously across the entire city. Live television anchors suddenly pressed fingers to their earpieces, interrupting their regular broadcasts with breaking news. Massive digital billboards in the financial district flickered, replacing luxury car advertisements with the official Taipan corporate seal. The heroic narrative he spent all morning building vaporized instantly. The undeniable authority of the chairman's office crushed his lies. Down in his quiet glass corner office, Ye Chen admired his luxury watch, completely oblivious to the incoming digital PR bomb. He mentally calculated exactly how many millions he would demand from the board during his upcoming afternoon negotiation meeting. His personal cell phone suddenly buzzed violently against the glass desk. A second later, his private corporate landline rang loudly. Within 10 seconds, every single phone in his office screamed, and his email inbox started rapidly overflowing with urgent alerts. He frowned and reached out to answer his desk phone, assuming groveling journalists were calling to praise his brilliant TV interview. Before his fingers touched the plastic receiver, his heavy glass office door was violently shoved open from the outside hallway. His lead secretary burst into the room. Her face was completely drained of blood, resembling a terrified, panic-stricken ghost. Gripping the metal doorframe with shaking hands, she stared at him as if he carried a highly contagious terminal disease. Standard office protocol vanished as she screamed over the deafening noise of the ringing phones on his expensive glass desk. She begged him to turn on his television monitor immediately, her eyes wide with sheer, unfiltered professional horror. Her voice cracked with pure panic as she delivered the fatal corporate blow, screaming that the company had just fired him on live television.
This is the true danger of an unchecked ego. Ye Chen actually believed he could steal credit from the person Chairman Liu personally hired to replace him. He went on national television to claim Project Neo, digging his own career grave in front of millions of viewers. Meanwhile, Linda tried the classic White Lotus victim act, only to get physically shoved into the dirt by her supposed corporate king. They are both scrambling for survival, while the real mastermind quietly drops a tactical PR nuke from the secure penthouse. Ye Chen's phones are exploding, his lies are fully exposed to the media, and his Taipan career is officially reduced to ash. Will he accept his brutal public execution gracefully, or will his panic drive him to do something completely unhinged? Stick around, because the career face slap is about to hit maximum impact.
A blistering headache pounded behind Ye Chen's eyes as he paced his luxury downtown apartment. He gripped a scalding mug of black coffee, stepping over empty liquor bottles that littered his imported glass table. Yesterday's humiliating corporate detainment had left him desperate to celebrate his supposed PR victory. Then, the morning financial broadcast glared through his flat-screen television. His bloodshot eyes locked onto the ticker tape at the bottom of the screen. The official Taipan corporate logo flashed aggressively behind the stern news anchor. Every word delivered a highly public execution. The broadcast confirmed senior manager Ye Chen was officially terminated for gross incompetence, corporate fraud, and intellectual property theft. A brutal infographic replaced his face. The anchor explicitly stated the billion-dollar NEO project was legally credited to Taipan's new executive director, Sophie. The porcelain cup slipped through his trembling fingers. It shattered violently against the polished hardwood floor, spraying hot coffee across his bare feet. His mind completely derailed. He refused to accept that a quiet, low-level intern had legally seized his golden ticket. Grabbing his wrinkled suit jacket off the leather sofa, he sprinted out the door. He needed to secure his corporate throne before the board locked him out. Morning rush hour at Taipan headquarters hummed with intense corporate energy. Ye Chen shoved past junior staff in the sprawling marble lobby, marching directly toward the VIP security turnstiles. Pulling out his premium access pass, he expected the heavy glass gates to slide open instantly. He slapped his corporate ID against the digital scanner. The machine emitted a harsh error screech, flashing a solid crimson light. Two towering security guards immediately blocked his path, their dark uniforms creating an unforgiving wall. Ye Chen slammed his badge against the scanner 3 more times. The machine denied him with cold, synthetic beeps. He barked at the guards, demanding a manual override for the irreplaceable head of Project Neo. The lead guard didn't even blink. He coldly stated that Chairman Liu had personally wiped Ye Chen's physical and digital access from the corporate mainframe. Former subordinates paused near the elevators. Instead of cowering from their old boss, they pulled out their smartphones. A junior analyst from his own team laughed loudly, asking how it felt to get fired on national television. A hot flush of pure humiliation crawled up Ye Chen's neck. He kicked the thick glass turnstile, demanding an immediate audience with the chairman. The polished silver doors of the executive elevator slid open with a soft chime. Sophie stepped out into the chaotic lobby. She no longer wore the simple faded uniform from the steakhouse. A razor-sharp, tailored suit draped her figure, radiating top-tier corporate authority. She carried a thick leather folder bearing the official Project Neo logo, the ultimate physical proof of her new status. Ye Chen lunged against the heavy security barricade. He pointed a shaking finger at her face, demanding she confess to the theft. He foolishly thought he could still bully her into submission, his arrogant brain viewing her as the insignificant girl who used to serve him coffee. Sophie stopped walking. She looked down at his sweating, frantic face with an expression of freezing indifference. Adjusting her expensive silk cuffs, her measured voice carried clearly across the silent lobby. She stated the chairman himself had personally reviewed her complex codes and finalized her promotion to executive director. Ye Chen opened his mouth to scream, but his vocal cords paralyzed. The crushing reality finally hit his thick skull. His brilliant media lie had been totally dismantled in one single brutal corporate strike. Sophie smiled coldly. She calmly informed him that his remaining desk items were currently waiting in the back alley inside cheap garbage bags. Quote 20, she advised. Turning her back on the ruined manager, she walked away. The security guards grabbed Ye Chen by his wrinkled suit lapels, dragging his thrashing body across the polished marble floor. They shoved him out the heavy glass doors into the freezing winter wind. He hit the hard concrete pavement, scraping his bare palms. His designer silk tie lay unraveled in the street dirt. Scrambling onto the curb, his ego simply refused to accept this total defeat. Yanking his cracked phone from his pocket, he dialed the private number of a rival logistics director across the city. He frantically offered his classified insider knowledge for a premium salary. The rival executive let out a harsh, mocking laugh. The cruel sound pierced the phone speaker like a rusted blade. The voice coldly informed him that the entire financial district had received a lethal blacklist warning. Nobody in the city would ever hire a disgraced fraud who publicly lied on television about stealing intellectual property. The rival executive explicitly called him radioactive garbage and ordered the ruined man to permanently delete his contact number before hanging up. Ye Chen desperately dialed 3 more competing companies. Every single human resources department hung up immediately. He slid down the cold brick wall of the towering Taipan headquarters, collapsing onto the dirty sidewalk. His phone violently vibrated with a priority email notification. The official legal department of Taipan Corporation had just struck the final blow. It was a massive corporate lawsuit demanding $20 million in damages for intellectual property theft and severe public reputation harm. The document explicitly stated all his remaining personal assets and bank accounts were legally frozen pending the active criminal trial. High above the freezing streets, the Taipan executive penthouse remained an absolute sanctuary of perfect silent control. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the tiny, pathetic figure sitting heavily on the concrete curb. My massive mahogany desk was perfectly clean. The corporate chessboard was finally cleared of these incompetent parasites. My executive assistant stepped quietly into the room, holding a highly encrypted tablet containing the final victory confirmation reports. He announced that Manager Ye was officially blacklisted across the entire industry and the $20 million lawsuit was actively filed. The assistant confirmed Sophie had flawlessly executed her new executive authority in the lobby, crushing the former manager's final delusion. A master strategist never throws a lavish celebration for simply stepping on a loud insect. I turned away from the thick glass, taking a slow, measured sip of chilled, sparkling water. "Finalize the preparations for the annual Taipan shareholder meeting tomorrow," I ordered. It was finally time to step completely out of the shadows. The entire financial elite needed to officially meet the man pulling the strings. Down in the freezing gutter, Ye Chen stared blankly at his cracked screen. A breaking news alert suddenly flashed across the damaged glass. The mysterious chairman of Taipan Corporation was officially scheduled to reveal his hidden identity at tomorrow's elite shareholder gala. A dangerous, highly unhinged spark ignited in Ye Chen's bloodshot eyes. He was completely cornered, but his toxic delusion miraculously survived. His fractured mind rapidly formulated a desperate, insane strategy. He firmly convinced himself he could bypass building security and beg the chairman in person to save him from the lawsuit. He completely failed to realize that the mysterious corporate god he planned to beg was the exact same man he arrogantly insulted at the cheap steakhouse.
Ye Chen's brain is fully short-circuiting. Notice how narcissists handle total collapse? Instead of accepting the $20 million reality check, his ego invents a new delusional lifeline. He actually thinks he can smooth-talk the mysterious chairman into giving his job back. The absolute irony is that he's about to throw himself at the feet of the exact same man he's been treating like trash this whole time. When that identity drops at the gala, the face slap is going to be legendary. Hit subscribe because tomorrow night, the masks come off and the final checkmate begins.
The moldy walls of the 20-square-meter rental practically vibrated. A deafening screaming match bled into the freezing apartment hallway. Ye Chen ducked hard as a cheap ceramic dinner plate smashed against the peeling yellow wallpaper, exploding inches from his skull. Shards scattered across the sticky linoleum. The cramped room reeked of stale instant noodles, sweat, and total financial ruin. Linda stood in the center of the wreckage wearing a stained fleece sweater. Her unwashed hair clung flatly to her pale cheeks. Absolute poverty had violently ripped off her mask. A negative balance across all her frozen accounts meant the permanent end of her flawless socialite aesthetic. She shrieked until her voice went hoarse, aiming a trembling finger directly at Ye Chen's wrinkled, heavily soiled dress shirt. She cursed his broken promises. He had sworn she would bathe in unlimited wealth, yet here she was, rotting in a freezing slum. Her voice cracked as she instantly deployed her classic innocent victim routine, frantically attempting to rewrite their shared history. She wailed about being a naive girl, manipulated by power. She entirely blamed him for pressuring her into dumping me at that steakhouse. She sobbed about how loyal and stable I used to be. Throwing my silver promise ring away was suddenly entirely Ye Chen's fault in her distorted memory. Theatrical tears streamed down her cheeks. She actively leaned into her own fake narrative to dodge the crushing weight of reality. Ye Chen stared back with pure venom. His bloodshot eyes bulged before he violently kicked a broken wooden chair against the crumbling drywall. He roared at her to shut her lying mouth. He spat that her highly toxic, bankrupt family was the sole reason his corporate accounts were audited and seized. Saliva flew from his lips. He blamed her endless parasitic greed for permanently destroying his prestigious Taipan executive career. Trying to buy her that red sports car on a company card had triggered the final trap. He loudly declared her a cursed, worthless burden, hurling vicious insults. He reminded her that she had tossed away a guaranteed marriage just to leech off his temporary corporate status. They were just two drowning rats trapped in a freezing cage, viciously tearing at each other's throats to avoid facing their massive debt. A battered television sat on a plastic milk crate in the corner. Suddenly, the evening financial broadcast blared through the heavy static. The stern anchor announced Taipan Corporation's annual shareholder gala, heavily publicizing the event scheduled for tomorrow night at the Glass headquarters. The broadcast confirmed massive news. The highly secretive chairman would finally reveal his identity to the entire financial district. Ye Chen froze. The murderous rage on his sweating face completely vanished, instantly replaced by a desperate, delusional spark. His fractured ego short-circuited entirely. He grabbed Linda by the collar of her cheap sweater, his eyes widening with a terrifying, unhinged hope. He frantically whispered about the elusive chairman. This exclusive gala was his absolute last chance to bypass the brutal industry blacklist. He genuinely believed he could stand before the ultimate boss and expose Sophie as a lying, incompetent software thief. He swore to fall on his knees at the chairman's feet, fully intending to beg for his massive salary and glass corner office back. Linda stopped her fake crying immediately. The mere mention of a brand new billionaire instantly revived her manipulative instincts. A sickening smile stretched across her pale lips as she calculated how to play the ultimate tragic victim for the big boss. She planned to weaponize her tears in front of the city's elite. She would beg the mysterious chairman to save a poor, abused girl from ruin. Wiping her face, she finalized her internal scheme. She would throw Ye Chen entirely under the bus the very second a lifeline appeared. Total narcissism completely blinded them both. They actually believed they could manipulate the absolute peak of the corporate food chain. High above those freezing slums, my executive penthouse remained entirely silent, an absolute fortress of cold strategic control. Seated behind my massive mahogany desk, I watched the city mayor respectfully sip a glass of 20-year-old scotch across the room. The politician smiled warmly, praising the recent financial bloodbath. He openly called the ruthless elimination of the Li clan's assets a masterpiece. He noted that the brutal corporate cleanup had completely stabilized the local markets while earning the absolute fear of the elite. Leaning forward nervously, the mayor admitted a hard truth. The entire city was terrified of the invisible strategist pulling the local strings. A celebratory smile never crossed my face. My fingers simply tapped a solid black, no-limit bank card against the polished wood. The real transition of power had not even started. I calmly informed the mayor that tomorrow night I would officially step into the light and assume total control. Bowing his head deeply, the mayor recognized the undeniable shift in market dominance. The public chessboard was finally set. Stepping out of the shadows was my final move. The local parasites had successfully starved themselves in the cold, waiting for a savior. Rain battered the thick glass behind me. The final trap was locked, and the desperate rats were about to seek out the cheese. Down in a rain-slicked VIP parking lot outside a luxury club, Ye Chen and Linda lurked in the shadows, hiding silently behind a damp concrete pillar. The bitter winter wind made them shiver violently. They desperately needed access to the gala, a need that pushed them straight into petty crime. Heavy club doors swung open, and a former Taipan mid-level manager stumbled out onto the pavement, heavily intoxicated and fumbling with his keys. Ye Chen recognized his old subordinate instantly. Darting out of the dark alley, he pretended to catch the drunk man mid-fall. As he propped the man up, Ye Chen's dirty, trembling fingers slipped smoothly into the inside pocket of the expensive suit jacket. A premium leather card holder emerged. Ye Chen quickly shoved the drunk man toward a waiting cab and scurried back into the dark alley. Linda snatched the leather wallet from his freezing hands and ripped open the flap. Her eyes gleamed with raw greed under the flickering street lamp. Inside sat two golden, holographic VIP shareholder passes for the Taipan Gala. They were the ultimate golden tickets to their delusional rescue. She clutched the stolen plastic tightly against her chest, convinced a brand new billionaire sponsor was finally within her reach. They had officially hit absolute rock bottom. The former elite couple was literally pickpocketing drunks in an alley just to crawl back into a room they had been banished from. The next morning arrived quickly. The filthy apartment smelled of cheap fabric spray and desperate panic as they prepared for their grand comeback. Ye Chen aggressively pulled on his only remaining designer suit. It was horribly wrinkled and still carried the faint stench of stale sweat. He stood in front of a badly cracked bathroom mirror, his hands shaking violently as he desperately tried to tie a ruined silk necktie. Pathetic apology speeches bounced off the glass. He practiced falling directly onto his knees the second the chairman walked out onto the stage. He reasoned that fake tears and heavy corporate jargon would definitely work. He completely convinced his fractured mind that he would win back his status. In the other room, Ika. Linda squeezed into an old cocktail dress. Stripped of her expensive foundation and diamond jewelry, she looked entirely hollow. She practiced a fragile, injured smile. A few calculated tears dropped down her cheeks. Her innocent victim routine was perfectly primed. The chairman would definitely pity her, she whispered to her reflection. She was completely ready to dump Ye Chen the moment a better deal appeared. They marched out of the freezing apartment block together. A nauseating blend of unearned arrogance and absolute desperation radiated off them both. The towering glass structure of Taipan headquarters loomed ahead in the night. Dozens of black luxury SUVs lined the street, dropping off the city's real elite. The stolen golden passes sat heavy in their hands. Their hearts hammered violently as they approached the glowing, heavily guarded security checkpoint. Total ignorance shielded their panic. They completely failed to realize they were walking straight into the open jaws of the very man they had betrayed. The massive glass doors of the assembly hall towered in front of them. The absolute final checkmate waited patiently just inside.
Can we take a second to appreciate the absolute irony here? These two highly toxic parasites are currently living in a freezing slum, throwing cheap plates at each other and blaming everyone but themselves. Ye Chen has literally degraded into a petty alleyway pickpocket. And their master plan? Their brilliant strategy is to sneak into an elite corporate gala to beg the mysterious chairman for mercy. They are fully expecting this billionaire god to swoop in, fire Sophie, and save them from their own miserable consequences. They have absolutely no clue that they are walking into a perfectly designed slaughterhouse, and the man they are about to beg on their hands and knees is the exact same guy they insulted at a cheap steakhouse. Hit subscribe right now, because the final mask is coming off, and the public face slap is going to be legendary.
The digital scanner emitted a sharp, piercing beep. A red LED flashed across the stolen VIP pass clutched in Ye Chen's grime-covered hand. The towering security guard glared down, cross-checking the mismatched name on his screen against the ruined, desperate man panting in front of him. Ye Chen's throat clicked audibly. Cold sweat instantly glued his unwashed collar to his freezing neck. Bracing his knees, the disgraced manager fully expected to be violently dragged out by his lapels and tossed straight into the rain-soaked gutter. But 20 feet away in the shadows, my executive assistant caught the guard's eye, delivering a microscopic, silent nod. The guard immediately stepped back, smoothly unhooking the heavy brass clip on the velvet rope. He cleared their path into the venue. As the guard ordered them inside, Ye Chen exhaled a shaky breath. His toxic ego instantly convinced him he had somehow outsmarted the high-end security grid. Puffing out his chest, he aggressively yanked at his frayed silk tie, his delusion completely masking the reality of the trap. Linda locked onto his arm, and they strutted through the towering oak doors, completely blind to the massive target painted squarely on their backs. Two desperate rats were eagerly marching straight into a billion-dollar cage. Watching them pass the threshold on my secure tablet, I let the feed play. The grand foyer of the Taipan Assembly Hall smelled of expensive oud and burning money. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the financial elite, where politicians and venture capitalists sipped premium champagne, murmuring about the upcoming corporate power shift. Ye Chen and Linda practically reeked of failure. Their wrinkled, damp clothes instantly drew disgusted sneers from the high society crowd. Heiresses physically recoiled as they passed. Nobody wanted to breathe the same oxygen as a publicly blacklisted corporate thief. Shrinking against a freezing marble pillar, Linda felt her armor crack under the absolute isolation. She was learning that social status without a VIP ATM simply did not exist. The sharp click of designer heels echoed across the marble floor. Sophie strode through the parted crowd holding a thick leather folder, wearing a flawlessly tailored executive suit. Top-tier investors actually bowed their heads slightly to let the new Neo project director pass. Ye Chen's bloodshot eyes locked onto her. His fractured mind couldn't process watching his former unpaid intern command such high-level corporate respect. Lunging forward, he blocked her path. A manic grin stretched across his face as he hissed threats about exposing her stolen glory. Spitting venom, he promised to tell the chairman everything, swearing she would be permanently thrown back into the poverty-stricken gutter. Sophie merely halted, looking down at his sweating, twitching face with an expression of freezing, surgical disgust. Casually adjusting her expensive silk cuffs, a cold smirk touched her lips. She simply told the disgraced manager to enjoy the final show. Smoothly wishing him luck, she bypassed him entirely, leaving the ruined man barking empty threats at her perfectly tailored back. Linda let out a pathetic whimper, pressing herself harder against the freezing wall. Watching a former coffee girl wield the ultimate power she had desperately chased shattered her remaining confidence. Suddenly, a resonant bass note echoed through the sprawling venue. The massive oak double doors to the primary shareholder auditorium swung wide open. As 200 elite guests filed into the cavernous room, Ye Chen aggressively shoved his way past a tech billionaire, desperate to secure a front row seat. He believed proximity was his only strategy to scream his apologies loud enough to secure a pardon. Instead, a heavily armed security officer immediately intercepted his charge, a heavy gloved hand clamping down hard onto his wrinkled collarbone. Shoving him violently backward, the guard coldly stated that their stolen, lower-tier VIP passes strictly restricted them to the rear balcony. Ye Chen stumbled hard. His face burned crimson as several nearby investors laughed softly at his public rejection. Defeated, he dragged Linda up the carpeted stairs to the dark balcony, sinking into a cheap folding chair in the shadows. Linda pulled out a cracked compact mirror and frantically rehearsed her fake crying. Whispering to her reflection, she dialed in her tragic victim routine, fully expecting the billionaire boss to melt into a puddle of pity. Her script was polished. She would blame Ye Chen for everything and beg the faceless chairman to rescue her from this poverty-stricken nightmare. Her toxic delusion ran so deep into her marrow that she truly thought she could seduce the ultimate ruler of the city with 3 fake teardrops. Deep inside the pitch-black backstage area, I stood completely still. A massive digital monitor array showed every angle of the auditorium. My executive assistant materialized from the shadows and handed me a glowing tablet, confirming the 2 targets were securely trapped in the back row. Pinching the screen, I zoomed the feed directly onto Ye Chen's sweating, twitching face. He was actively mouthing his groveling apology under his breath. Beside him, Linda kept pinching her wrist to physically force her eyes to water, desperate to secure that perfect, helpless aesthetic for her grand finale. They had literally drained their last stolen pennies just to sneak into my building to beg me to protect them from my own corporate wrath. Handing the dark screen back to the assistant, cold metal clicked softly in the shadows as I adjusted my heavy platinum executive cufflinks. Every single trap had executed flawlessly. The public chessboard was completely cleared of obstacles. I gave the final verbal confirmation, my voice echoing like cracking ice in the dark corridor. It was time to finally meet our esteemed guests. My footsteps carried me steadily toward the heavy velvet curtains. The low hum of 200 elites outside felt like pure electric anticipation. Out in the massive auditorium, the house lights snapped off violently, and a thick, heavy silence instantly suffocated the entire room. A single, blinding white spotlight punched through the pitch black, hitting the polished mahogany podium dead center on the expansive stage. The lead moderator stepped up to the microphone. His booming voice echoed over the PA system, commanding total silence from the wealthy crowd as he announced the exact moment the entire financial district had waited 6 months to witness. He demanded everyone rise to welcome the true chairman of Taipan Corporation. 200 billionaires instantly stood up in perfect unison, sending a wave of deafening, heavily calculated applause crashing through the room. Up in the dark balcony, Ye Chen violently grabbed the steel railing. His knuckles turned bone white as a manic, desperate smile split his unwashed face. Hissing at Linda, he ordered her to prepare to drop to her knees. They were going to rush the lower stairs and publicly beg for a pardon. Linda wiped her eyes, her chest heaving with manufactured panic as she stretched her lips into a pitiful pout, ready to launch her ultimate victim routine. The heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage slowly parted. The rhythmic, sharp sound of my leather dress shoes hit the oak floorboards. Camera shutters fired like machine guns into the spotlight as the absolute apex predator of the corporate food chain finally stepped out of the shadows. Wearing a pitch-black, bespoke executive suit, I walked directly into the blinding beam of light and slowly turned to face the hushed auditorium. Up in the shadows, Ye Chen and Linda instantly stopped breathing. The fake tears completely froze on Linda's pale, horror-struck face.
The absolute irony. These 2 drained their final pennies just to beg the final boss for mercy, completely oblivious that their corporate executioner is the exact same man they threw away like trash. Linda's fake tears are about to freeze solid, and Ye Chen's fragile ego is seconds away from a fatal crash. What happens when the spotlight finally hits their betrayal? Find out in the next chapter.
The blinding white spotlight sliced through the pitch-black auditorium, locking dead center onto my face. Below the stage, 200 of the city's wealthiest elites rose to their feet in perfect unison, sending a wave of deafening applause vibrating through the heavy oak floorboards. Up in the shadowy balcony, the manufactured tears instantly froze on Linda's pale cheeks. Her breath hitched. Her hands shot up to violently clamp over her mouth, stifling a sudden choking gasp of raw horror. Ye Chen's knees simply gave out. His entire body weight collapsed heavily into the cheap folding chair. His bloodshot eyes bulged from his skull as his fractured mind violently rejected the physical reality standing under the stage lights. The mysterious, untouchable chairman of Taipan Corporation, they had spent their last stolen pennies to beg for mercy, was me. The exact same broke ex-boyfriend they had thrown away at a greasy steakhouse. Stepping up to the polished mahogany podium, I casually adjusted the microphone. The cavernous hall instantly dropped into a suffocating pin-drop silence. Every single billionaire, politician, and powerful investor hung on my impending word, the atmosphere thick with undisputed corporate reverence. In the dark rafters, Ye Chen clawed frantically at his own throat. Gasping for air, his pulse hammered a sickening rhythm against his eardrums. He muttered the word, quote, 22 over and over, his ego desperately trying to categorize the man holding absolute power as a powerless loser. Next to him, Linda finally started crying for real. The ultimate billionaire provider she had been hunting across the city was the exact same man she had discarded for a mid-level fraud. I didn't even bother glancing up toward their cheap seats. Looking directly out at the sea of wealthy investors, my voice echoed like cracking ice through the massive audio system. I calmly announced the successful conclusion of Taipan's internal purge. I stated that the corporation had surgically amputated its internal thieves, permanently severing their toxic, parasitic networks. Intelligence and unwavering loyalty were the only accepted currencies moving forward. Down in the front rows, the city's top venture capitalists murmured their profound approval of the ruthless cleanup. Up in the balcony, every single syllable felt like a steel bat smashing into Ye Chen's ribs. The horrific timeline finally connected in his thick skull. The declined corporate card at the luxury auto showroom. The sudden, highly public security detainment. The revoked charity grants that bankrupted the Lee family. The brutal PR termination on live television. He had literally thrown a crumpled $100 bill at the undisputed financial ruler of the entire metropolis. I had personally engineered every single millisecond of his downfall from my soundproof executive penthouse. The ruined manager physically shrank into his cheap plastic chair, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. Resting my hands on the edges of the podium, I smoothly pivoted the agenda to the future, inviting the true architect of the Neo project to the bright stage. Sophie stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. Wearing a flawlessly tailored executive suit, she radiated a quiet, razor-sharp authority. I officially announced her immediate promotion to Chief Vice President of Strategic Initiatives. Addressing the hushed crowd, I praised her rare sincerity and brilliant analytical mind. Her unwavering respect toward a seemingly broke stranger had proven her core worth. She had earned the keys to a billion-dollar empire. The auditorium erupted into a massive standing ovation. Tech billionaires and politicians passionately applauded her meteoric rise. Up in the shadows, Linda ground her teeth so hard she tasted copper. A searing, toxic jealousy completely consumed her hollow ego. That was supposed to be her standing under those golden spotlights. She could have been the one showered in billionaire applause, untouchable and secure. Instead, she was rotting in a damp, unwashed sweater, forced to watch the polite waitress from the steakhouse legally inherit her wildest delusions of grandeur. As I stepped down from the grand stage to shake hands with the mayor in the prestigious front row, a frantic commotion erupted near the central aisle. The heavy velvet security ropes snapped as two bodies barreled through the barricade. Ye Chen and Linda had completely lost their minds. Driven by sheer animalistic desperation, they shoved their way past startled investors, sprinting directly toward my position. A dozen heavily armed security guards immediately converged on the threat. I simply raised a single index finger, instantly freezing the guards in their tracks. I wanted to let them crash onto the floor right at my feet. The final public humiliation needed to be entirely their own doing. Ye Chen slammed his knees so hard onto the polished stone they bruised. He slid forward, his face hovering inches from the toes of my leather Oxfords. Abandoning whatever microscopic shred of human dignity he had left, he wailed loudly for the entire room to hear. He frantically begged for my forgiveness, his voice cracking as he swore he would work as an unpaid janitor just to return the stolen corporate funds. Linda aggressively shoved his shoulder aside. Dropping to her knees right next to him, she attempted to deploy her ultimate emotional weapon. Forcing her eyes wide to maximize the tearful, innocent victim aesthetic, she looked up at me from the dirt. She reached out with unwashed, trembling hands, desperately trying to grip the crisp fabric of my bespoke suit trousers. Sobbing pitifully, she swore she had always loved me. Her shaking voice echoed through the silent hall as she claimed she was just a naive, easily manipulated girl. She aggressively pointed a finger at Ye Chen, loudly accusing him of brainwashing and threatening her into leaving the restaurant that night. Right there on the marble floor, the two parasites viciously turned on each other, screaming wild criminal accusations while crawling like insects at my feet. The surrounding assembly hall watched the pathetic display with cold, silent disgust. Elite investors stepped backward, refusing to let the desperate couple touch their tailored hems. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the sideshow with the same mild distaste one might have for roadkill. I smoothly shifted my stance, causing Linda's grasping hands to miss my trousers entirely. My expression remained a mask of sheer, unbreakable ice. I quietly reminded her that she had willingly thrown my promise ring onto a greasy table because she craved a shiny corporate ATM. I coldly informed her that her manufactured tears held zero currency in my empire. She was no longer a person to me, she was simply a toxic stain on a pristine floor. Her final manipulative delusion violently shattered, Linda shrieked in agonizing despair, the crushing weight of my absolute indifference finally breaking her mind. Shifting my gaze down to the sweating, trembling former manager, my tone remained entirely flat. I told Ye Chen that groveling to a board of directors was useless when he was already speaking to the executioner. His destined place was a concrete prison cell for attempting to embezzle highly classified corporate funds. Looking up at the towering security chief, I delivered my final corporate command. A simple nod authorized them to take out the trash. 4 heavily armed guards immediately seized them by their wrinkled collars. Ye Chen howled in sheer terror as they violently dragged his thrashing body backward across the polished marble floor. Linda kicked and screamed wildly, her designer heels long gone. Her pathetic wails echoed off the crystal chandeliers as the guards hauled them both toward the massive foyer. The strategic checkmate was flawlessly delivered. Their fragile social statuses and massive egos were permanently reduced to dust. The heavy oak doors of the Grand Assembly Hall slammed shut with a deafening boom, permanently sealing them out of my world. Out in the freezing rain, the strobing red and blue lights of waiting police cruisers illuminated their ruined, terrified faces.
This is the ultimate checkmate. The moment the chairman stepped into that spotlight, their entire delusional reality collapsed. They literally paid to sneak in and beg for mercy from the exact guy they threw away. Notice how Linda's innocent victim routine completely backfired? Her manipulation only works on weak egos. Against a true strategist, her fake tears hold absolutely zero currency. He handed the keys to his empire to the loyal waitress and let security drag the gold digger right out the door. Stick around for the epic finale, because the police are waiting in the rain to lock them away for good.
Icy rain hammered the downtown asphalt. Red and blue police sirens strobed across the flooded streets, reflecting off $20 million in shattered corporate assets. The heavy oak doors of the Taipan Assembly Hall remained padlocked. The corporate face slap was over. The physical legal execution was officially beginning. Dirty rainwater soaked right through Ye Chen's $10,000 designer suit. His jaw trembled. The arrogant VIP alpha facade washed away into the street gutters. 2 heavy-set officers grabbed his lapels. They shoved his chest hard against the cold steel hood of a patrol cruiser. Cold metal ratcheted tightly around his wrists. The sharp clicks snapped through the winter air. A detective stood under a black umbrella. He read the disgraced Taipan manager his rights, his voice completely flat. The criminal charges listed aggressive corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, and grand larceny of $50 million in company capital. Ye Chen thrashed against the wet hood. His bloodshot eyes bulged. Panic set in. The physical reality of a concrete cell crushed his lungs. The $20 million lawsuit zeroed out his offshore accounts. He faced 40 years in a maximum security block. He frantically whipped his head around. His crazed gaze scanned the dark street, instantly locking onto a shivering figure sitting in the mud. Linda sat right in the middle of an icy puddle. The winter storm battered her thin shoulders, washing away her expensive foundation. Her cheap fleece sweater absorbed the street dirt. Unwashed hair plastered against her skull. She stared blankly at the strobe lights. The green tea facade was permanently dead. Her elite billionaire socialite status evaporated overnight, leaving zero financial runway. Ye Chen bared his teeth. He spat through the driving rain, screaming that this entire financial slaughterhouse was her fault. He howled that her bottomless white lotus greed actively dragged him into federal prison. He blamed her VIP obsession for burning his shares. Screaming over the sirens, he cursed the exact day he bought her a single designer bag. He publicly branded her a radioactive parasite. Linda clamped her dirty hands over her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the humiliating public execution. Her chosen premium provider threw her directly under the legal bus to save his own neck. The VIP ATM was officially out of cash. The lead officer grabbed the back of Ye Chen's neck. He forcefully folded the screaming manager into the cramped back seat. The reinforced door slammed shut with a heavy thud. Thick glass instantly muted his pathetic wails. The patrol cruiser peeled away from the curb. The sirens faded into the dark distance, permanently logging Ye Chen out of elite society. Linda sat completely alone in the mud. The angry creditors had already stripped her family's remaining 3 properties. Every single bridge burned to ash. Her family was bankrupt. Her corporate savior rotted in a holding cell. She slowly pushed herself up from the wet concrete, her muscles violently shivering. Her feet ached inside ruined sneakers as she wandered down the block. The winter storm battered the fallen socialite. She dragged her soaked body through the financial district, limping past empty sidewalks. She passed towering glass skyscrapers. The neon Taipan logos illuminated the wet pavement, spotlighting her total failure. Her mind short-circuited. Frozen legs instinctively carried her away from the banks and toward a highly familiar street corner. The mid-range steakhouse from 3 years ago stood directly across the wet pavement. Amber light spilled onto the harsh winter concrete. This was the exact location of our cold break. This was the specific table where she threw my silver promise ring away for a fake illusion. A delusional hope sparked in her chest. She remembered sitting by the heater in that booth, shielded from credit card debts and eviction. Her broken ego hallucinated a rewind button. She just wanted to step back inside and escape the brutal face slap of poverty. Her ruined sneakers stumbled clumsily across the rainy street. She reached a trembling hand toward the heavy brass door handle. A heavy hand wearing a tactical black glove clamped firmly over the brass handle. A towering private security guard stepped out of the shadows. The guard wore a premium earpiece and a bespoke black suit. He looked down at her shivering form with cold professional disgust. He physically blocked her path, shoving her back toward the rainy sidewalk. He announced the restaurant was permanently closed for a private function. He tapped his earpiece. Only supreme executive members of the Taipan Corporation held security clearance for the building tonight. Linda's breath hitched. She squinted through the heavy sheets of rain, wiping muddy water from her eyes to peer through the thick glass. The interior of the greasy steakhouse was completely unrecognizable. Flawless white linens and crystal centerpieces replaced the cheap tables. I bought out the entire block for the night. Dozens of elite Taipan executives mingled warmly inside, sipping premium imported champagne. The room radiated corporate victory. Top venture capitalists laughed together, celebrating the ruthless cleansing of the local market. I stood near the exact center of the glowing room, wearing a perfectly tailored bespoke suit. My posture remained completely relaxed. Sophie stood right beside me. A pristine, custom-fitted designer evening gown draped her frame as she held a crystal flute of sparkling wine. The quiet waitress pouring cheap coffee was gone. The official chief vice president of the heaviest empire in the city took her place. She commanded respect from every single billionaire in the room. Unwavering loyalty earned her a seat at the absolute highest table. I turned toward Sophie. My crystal glass rose to lightly clink against hers, celebrating her massive promotion and our flawless win. Outside in the bitter dark, Linda pressed her dirty hands against the icy glass. Her chest heaved as her breathing spiraled out of control. The realization physically crushed her lungs. The immense wealth, elite status, and untouchable corporate power were originally placed in her hands. She threw my silver promise ring directly onto one of these exact tables. Her decision to walk away from a literal empire cost her everything. A former minimum wage waitress now held her exact fantasy. Sophie basked in the golden VIP light, sharing a celebratory toast with the chairman. Linda tapped her wet fingers against the thick glass. She needed me to turn around. She needed me to witness her suffering and show an ounce of pity. I took a slow sip of champagne. My dark eyes swept directly past her shivering silhouette as I casually glanced out the front window. My gaze simply kept moving. Her existence in the dark, rain-soaked city streets failed to register on my radar. She was completely invisible. A forgotten, bankrupt ghost haunting the freezing pavement held zero emotional currency in my world. Ice-cold indifference delivered the ultimate lethal face slap. A total lack of anger mathematically proved the ledger was completely zeroed out. Linda broke. A gut-wrenching wail tore from her throat, immediately swallowed by the thunder. Her frozen legs gave out completely. Her knees buckled, sliding down the icy glass to collapse on the wet concrete. The brutal reality of permanent exile short-circuited her brain. Muddy hands covered her face as she sobbed into the bitter winter storm. The warm golden light from the restaurant spilled over her ruined figure. She traded genuine loyalty for a cheap VIP illusion. That same illusion left her to rot in the bitter dark with $30 million in debt. High above that pathetic street scene, towering digital billboards illuminated the financial district. Top anchors broadcasted the final market updates. A giant neon screen displayed Ye Chen's miserable police mugshot. A mask of sheer animalistic terror completely replaced his arrogant smile. The lead anchor confirmed the judge officially denied bail for the disgraced manager. Guards transferred him to a maximum security block for trial. The broadcast shifted to a soaring green financial graph. Taipan Corporation shares skyrocketed, hitting historic market highs and generating billions. The anchor spoke my name with heavy reverence. Chairman Liu officially stood as the undisputed strategic genius who mercilessly cleansed the rot. Investors flooded the Taipan networks with aggressive capital. A CEO who violently protects his company from internal thieves guarantees high dividends. High above the glowing city, I stepped out onto the private terrace of my executive penthouse. The driving rain finally stopped. The neon-lit skyline stretched out for miles. Every single glowing glass tower and bustling street operated directly under my silent corporate shadow. My executive assistant stepped onto the quiet terrace. He wore his usual sharp suit, holding a highly encrypted satellite phone in steady hands. He reported the European corporate syndicate was actively waiting on the secure line. They needed an immediate signature on the logistics merger. My hand gripped the cold metal frame of the secure phone. A sharp smirk touched my lips. The local chessboard was fully conquered. Cold calculation took over as I watched the tiny specks moving on the wet streets below. Crushing toxic greed was just good business. I ordered the international partners to initiate the global expansion protocol. $50 million in capital secured from the purge was ready to deploy. Green tea manipulators and arrogant thieves sat permanently locked in the dark. Loyal strategists proudly stood in the golden light. My back turned to the sprawling city skyline as I walked into the secure warmth of my penthouse. The public audit was permanently closed.
And that is how you execute a flawless checkmate. The most brutal revenge isn't screaming or gloating. It's absolute, freezing indifference. Linda's White Lotus illusion shattered the second she realized her VIP ATM was permanently closed, while Ye Chen's arrogance bought him 40 years in a concrete box. True power rewards loyalty and surgically removes the rot. Thanks for riding out this corporate slaughterhouse with me. Until the next boardroom bloodbath, stay ruthless and log out of the drama.